Well, welcome to the show. Great to have you on. I always like to start, Carole, with just a bit of an introduction, a little bit about your journey, kind of how you've kind of progressed through the ranks and to get yourself to where you are today. So, if you can just do a little bit of an intro, that'd be great.
Yeah, of course. So, good morning. I'm Carole Roberts. I am Director of Technology and Data here at Leeds Building Society. I've been here for just coming up to 5 years. In terms of my career prior to this, I spent my whole career working in retail finance, so in banking, and then latterly in the building society sector. Almost all of that time has been spent in the mutual space, so working with member-owned businesses. I began life or professional life in credit risk, working as an analyst, and very quickly became quite passionate about data and the need for data and robust, reliable data in order to solve problems and leverage value. And critically, the challenges with treating data in silos rather than recognising it as a kind of collective asset. So during my time in that role, I evolved into kind of data analysis, and then worked on a big data warehouse project, and then started to lead a data capability. And this was very much as data was evolving as a discipline in the world, I guess, the ride of the wave of big data and all these things. So I led a data function for some years, and that data function grew from 2 people to kind of almost 90 people doing all things data.
Oh wow.
That being data governance, data engineering, data run, BI exploitation. I left my previous organisation after 22 years and joined Leeds to help look at how we could modernise our data estate. And I was in a director of data role for around 4 years here. And then in March time this year, I took on a wider remit of technology and data. So my role today includes our whole data office with all of the things I mentioned earlier. It includes accountability for our emerging AI and AI strategy. It includes a large part of our transformation and change portfolio, our IT run and platform capabilities, and our IT security and operational resilience. So quite a wide remit now within the organisation, but a lot of closely coupled capabilities and disciplines. Very fortunate to have a very varied, interesting role.
Yeah, absolutely. And you've had some, quite, large responsibilities along the way, growing a team from 2 to 90. Like, talk to me about that journey. How did you go about that? What were some of the, biggest challenges you experienced during that time, Carole?
Yeah, really interesting, I think, in reflection. I'm very, very passionate about being a leader, and to some extent, the discipline in which you lead, I think, starts to become a little bit less important, though I do think having the SME knowledge helps you be able to kind of guide, coach, or lead people. Um, for me, leading people at scale is something that is an evolving skill. It's something that is different. So you start off, and the people who work for you know the name of all their kids, their football teams, their favourite dinner, everything going on in their lives. And that really helps, because I think you need to know your teams. The bigger and
Hmm.
bigger the teams get, there's more layers in between, and the harder and harder it is, both in terms of my aging memory to remember all those things, but also you don't have the capacity to build the same level of connection. And you have to kind of lead slightly differently, but still lead, I think, with authenticity. You still need to absolutely care about your team. So the other critical thing for me on that journey has been the evolution of skills. So
Hmm.
when I began my career in data, and when I first took on leading a team, we were using mainframe coding. The
Hmm.
concept of things like Power BI, modern data platforms, cloud, they just weren't even concepts. And so not only has it been about building the team from a size and scale, but a real evolution of skills the whole time along that journey as well, and how we build skills for the future, and how we see the opportunity for colleagues to kind of further develop and add more strings to their bow. And we're still on that journey now at Leeds. We are moving into cloud-based for our data. We've brought
Hmm.
in a lot of the Microsoft stack, and all of those things have looked at how we take colleagues on the journey from a skills and development perspective.
And how do you sort of balance that? Because technology is changing so quickly. So how do you ensure that the team are upskilling at the pace that the technology is evolving?
Yeah, it's a really good question, because there's probably three things we have to balance there. One is we've still got a job to do today. When you start things like a migration journey, you for a long time get into a coexistence position where you've got the platforms and capability of today, but you need to build for the platforms and capability of tomorrow. You also need people to be doing the do. And actually, how do you balance training, mentoring, coaching, skills development alongside needing to run both today and tomorrow? It is a continual trade-off in truth. And we've taken various routes through that. So there are times you need to bring in some additional support who already have the skills, with their primary role being to coach, support, guide, help people kind of shadow and skill. Classroom-based training is really great, but it's often a little bit abstract. So I've certainly been in lots of training in my time where I've learned really clever ways of bringing together data sets with 20 rows of data in, or that tell me about what people like to eat for dinner. But when I come back and apply that to databases with millions or billions of rows of data, that practical application is where I think that we really get the skills development. So for us, a lot of it is about how do we get the skills we already have to help influence and shape the skills of people who need that development. With a lot of colleagues in the team who are really, really keen to learn and develop. So I'd say we do a combination of classroom-based learning, leveraging skills from one another. We've brought in some new roles like technical leads, whose role is not to sit and engineer, but to create the standards, the repeatable design patterns, to coach, to mentor, to advise, to be a soundboard. Those roles have been a game changer for us in that skills evolution, and is something we've really seen help pivot us into some of that skills of tomorrow.
Nice. And how much value do you see in some of the certifications? I get asked a lot about, how do I upskill in certain technologies, and I do sort of tend to encourage people to go down the certification route, particularly like Microsoft and Databricks. They've got quite good academies. How have you seen those certifications, add value into the day-to-day?
The certifications are something that we've probably started to dip our toes into from a technology and certainly data perspective in the last maybe 12, 18 months, mainly as part of our journey into Azure and some of the certification you can do in and around Azure fundamentals and business intelligence and Power BI, but also, as you say, in and around Databricks, which is one of the tools that we are using for our ETL capability. I'm a huge fan, actually, and I'm very opposed to an old school mindset that if you certify people, they're going to put it on the CV so they can go somewhere else. Actually, we should be treating people in a way that this is where they want to be and they want to kind of develop. And I think that the certification can help colleagues feel in themselves they've almost got a license to operate, and that it proves they've passed almost their own quality threshold. So I'm a big fan, and we've seen some really positive responses from the team where we've invested in that certification. Some of it's difficult. I think back in my day, I did some certification in the early 2000s, and it was multiple choice tick box, and no one kind of particularly interested. Some of these certifications are really hard. You've really
Yeah.
got to pass the threshold, and I think it makes people themselves feel they've almost earned that right to kind of do their role, and anything that makes people feel more equipped, better enabled, I'm an absolute huge advocate and fan of.
Yeah, nice. Okay, great. And then going into the cloud transformation program then that you've been leading at Leeds. So let's talk about that. Like, what's that look like? What are some of the challenges that you've experienced? And maybe what advice would you give to people who are going on, a similar transformation program?
Yeah, so there's two elements of our journey that are within my remit now. One of them kind of quite latterly. One is our data transformation into cloud, and now the actual cloud platform team sit within my remit. We have other elements in the organisation, such as our customer-facing digital channels that sit outside, but are still part of the same integrated platforms. I think for us, it's a very interesting journey. And I think one of the key things is this is not the same as an on-prem box that just happens to be sat somewhere else. The considerations we need to make are fundamentally different, whether that's from a security, an access, a privacy, a resilience, a cost. The cost is such a different consideration in a cloud journey to on-premise. So 20 years ago, when we needed to do something in data, we went and bought a big tin and we plugged it in and we spent some cost and we potentially capitalized that over a number of years, and we bought an amount of space and we worked till we filled it up, or the box got too old, and then we bought another one. You know, as we move into cloud, everything we do, it's a pay-as-you-go model, right? You've not got the same upfront cost, but you can very quickly get to that point anyway. Sometimes you've got to make decisions about where you do things just to keep data in one place, to cut down on some of the cost implications, efficiency of process, and real optimization from a configuration perspective. We had some examples. One of the tech leads I mentioned earlier did some great work about 3 months ago where a tiny config change reduced the size of our databases by 90%. And in doing so, reduced the cost to operate those databases accordingly. So that optimization, that fit for the future, what we don't have to consider to the same extent anymore is huge upgrade projects, because the platform maintenance, the resilience is all fundamentally different. But actually the engineering side and the design considerations, definitely more front loading around optimization, cost management. There's also challenges in terms of recency of tooling. So one of the benefits of being in the cloud is the maintenance of the applications, the releases, etc. Obviously come out of the box. That's something almost that our cloud service provider or Microsoft in our instance need to worry about. But as an organization, that means sometimes you're getting enforced change, and you've got to be able to kind of move with that. But also, if you take Power BI, there is new functionality every single week. How do you choose which to take and when not to take it? You could literally have 5 or 6 people whose full-time job is just turning on new functionality and some of this cloud capability, being proportionate, deciding when you can leverage value without being like a kid in a sweet shop. That in itself is a cultural shift from let me go and purposely find a tool to meet a business problem to actually what could I use here. That has been a definite shift for us, and we're still on that journey.
Okay, and just remind me your current stack then. What does the environment look like at Leeds?
So
You've got
we
Azure
invest
as you.
very heavily in, yeah, sorry, it cut out then.
No, you carry on, Carole.
Sorry, it cut out. I wasn't interrupting you. Yeah, we've gone heavily into the Azure stack. So we're in the middle of a major transformation program at a customer system level, which is going more heavily into the Azure space. We've invested in Azure from a data perspective. So we've got Azure Integration Services, we've got Data Factory. We've gone down a Databricks route, but obviously hosted within Azure. We've got Data Lake Gen 2, we've got Power BI. We've recently enabled Copilot for a number of users within the organization. One of the benefits of us from being Azure across the board is we're now in a position where we've got some of our customer systems are going to be hosted in Azure. Therefore, we can manage that data from the moment it's captured atomically all the way through to the reporting. The document gets reported out, it can stay within the environment. And we've turned on tools like Purview to give us some of the end-to-end provenance lineage. It lets us do things like define data from a glossary perspective right at the point that it first exists and track it all the way through to regulatory reporting, etc. So, yeah, Azure stack from a cloud perspective and lots of capability around it, but also, I say at times, not just Microsoft native, things like Databricks clearly sit across multi-cloud, but in our instance, we're executing it within our Azure environment.
Yeah. Okay. And what made you kind of go down that route? Like, what was the reason that you've chosen those toolings and technologies?
It's a really, really good question. And I think one of the things that is normally the instinct to do, so if I take the data strategy initiative I kicked off in 2021, we knew we wanted to go into a cloud environment. We knew we needed to be able to develop at better scale than we had today. And we knew we wanted to take advantage of modern tooling and modern capability rather than some of the legacy capability. The instinct sometimes is to go into a huge procurement exercise. Let me go and do a big assessment on what could I get from Google, what could I get from AWS, what could I get from Azure, etc. And quite often I think those decisions can be made in silos. In our instance, we already had an Azure capability on the pitch. We already had a cloud environment that had gone through all of that IT security, InfoSec, all of the procurement side, etc., etc. And it was performing the way we needed it to. And actually, there's an element of it, if it's not broke, kind of don't fix it. So rather than go and start from day one and go and do a huge 6-month, let's disappear and go into procurement, we instead worked with our third-party CSP a company called ANS, and they worked with us on on a Microsoft funded exercise called Navigator, where we hypothesized Azure was the answer. And then we said, if we take that as a given, how would we then design our environment? And if it isn't, then we'll go out and do a procurement exercise. And we were comfortable on the back of that, that it was not only the answer, but would better integrate the journey we were already on. And as a result, we moved into a Microsoft platform for our data. And then again, that's again, critical mass has evolved and evolved. So that probably fast tracked where we would have been if we'd gone down a traditional route, and has given us massive benefit, because from an internal capability, our cloud team can be very heavily focused on Azure rather than a multi-cloud, lots of different skills. And our scale as an organisation, we're a large building society, but obviously compared to some other organisations, some may consider us a smaller organisation. Actually, we're not in a position where we're going to have 2,000 cloud engineers that can all be skilled in different cloud capabilities. So it's enabled us to leverage real value from a skill set that can be used in multiple disciplines.
Yeah, nice. And just kind of going back to the start of your answer, Carole. So you said, like, we knew we wanted to kind of go down this transformation route. Like, what trigger points had you seen that made you make that decision to modernize? What were the challenges that you were facing prior to modernizing?
So when I joined the organisation, I actually joined Leeds on a 6-month temporary contract. At that
Okay.
point, the ask was to, I'm still here. At that point, the ask was to look at where we were from a data maturity perspective and what was it going to take to move us strategically forward. One of the big challenges being, how would our current environment start to cause more problems for other things happening in the organisation, having to feed and water that data ecosystem? So as I mentioned, we're doing a huge system level transformation program. And if we'd kept our data as is, data would have become a huge risk in a larger transformation program rather than opportunity. And so we wanted to modernize ahead of that in order to clear the path, rationalize. What we found at that point in time, as is common in most organizations, I think, was that data had evolved very organically. So each business area had developed a data capability to meet their needs for specific cases. So, you know, for example, a risk department needs data for modeling purposes and reporting. So they'd gone off and created a capability that's really mature and works really, really well for them. Finance got their own kind of data engine that worked really, really well for them. And, you know, I think this is fairly common when I speak to my peers in other organizations. Without a top-down strategy, you will always find a way to meet the business needs, but are you doing it efficiently? Are you doing it effectively? Are you creating consistent tooling? And that includes things like from a colleague skills. When you've got different tools in each separate function, then what you get to is a lack of cohesion as a data professional. Where can I move internally? How do I develop if they're using totally different skills, totally different tools to me? And so there's real benefit in starting to bring a top-down strategy to consistent tools, consistent ways of working, and then you start to move to the very promised single source of truth that then everybody can start to look at. And instead of saying, I think the number's 4, I think the number's 6, and you spend all your time debating what the right number is, you actually get one version that tells you the number in the first place with all the wraparounds. So when I joined the organisation, that was the vision that I painted. I think we need to move from where we are in a maturity perspective here. And an immediate part of that was, what's the tooling and the platform capability? That was 2021. And I think at that point, it was a fairly no-brainer that cloud was going to be the right direction of travel in terms of the emerging tool sets. When we started to look at tooling and capability, so many vendors we would consider were moving to a cloud-first model, etc. I think in 21 to have gone down an on-prem strategy would have been really short-sighted and wouldn't have given us the scale we needed. And scale was really important because this is a multi-year journey. What we didn't want to do is invest a load of cost in 2021, guessing what we might need by 27, 28. Actually, what scale gives us is, what cloud gives us is the elasticity to grow at scale and to build that out as and when demand needs. So you start with 5 developers on a fairly small subscription. Actually, suddenly you're at 200 developers and you can build that out in the scale without upfront having to guess all of that capability. So there was a timing point, but also it was to meet genuine business demand.
Yeah. Okay, great. So we're 4 years on now, aren't we, from the sort of start of this
5.
transformation?
Yeah.
I'm sure it's been fun and hard work. What are you seeing as some of the biggest successes then that you've achieved, and what kind of where's the ROI been over the course of this journey thus far?
Yeah, I think for us, firstly, I've obviously mentioned the transformation program. We created a modern platform that all of our new technology can interface into as a single kind of agnostic data point. So historically, you end up in a position where one system on the kind of left-hand side of an architectural picture has to find a point-to-point interface into lots of different data repositories. So that could be one for finance, one for risk, one for marketing, etc. And that means that anytime you change one of those core systems, you've got to change 4 or 5 downstream point-to-point interfaces. A lot of the time, those interfaces work differently. So some maybe can use ODBC connectors to go and leverage the capability. Some need you to go and unlock the data into maybe an XML file. Some need you to put it in a flat file. So you end up with data being passed all around the organization in lots and lots of different ways in order to meet that kind of plug and socket scenario. One of the big benefits is that Azure is so agnostic in the ability to interface data to it that by creating a single landing zone, anything we now change at source just needs to distribute that data once to one single place. We only need to worry about the data in transit risk once. We only need to catalog that data once. And then we federate that data to the business teams downstream where we need, and they can come and plug into that one source of truth. That hugely deduplicates the work we need to do in projects. It massively de-risks the movement of data and the likelihood of ending up with different data. So for example, let's not give risk data that was cut half an hour after the data we gave to finance, or they're never going to reconcile because customer data moves all of the time. So huge benefit of having this one platform in one place and our other tooling being able to plug and play into that. We've also seen huge value at the other end of the spectrum. So like most organizations, we're very heavily Excel based in terms of
Hmm.
reporting, that we can have all the systems in the world, but it ends up in Excel and PowerPoint in terms of how we actually build and distribute reporting. We've moved heavily into the exploitation of Power BI now. And the approach we've got to that is a team within the central data office that own the tool, that make data available and provision it into Power BI, but a real empowerment across the whole of the organization to go and self-build and to go and build reporting that meets that business demand. And it's fantastic when I go into a meeting and people pull up web browser and just show us the latest report. We've taken away a whole lot of work that used to happen in that end user computing layer, where people were sat in Excel, moving a graph on every month, extending a table row, archiving off the last one, etc. We've moved instead to the refresh of the data, auto refreshes the reports. We built something called our analysis and reporting catalog, and that
Hmm.
gives us the ability to, in one place, tell the whole of the organization what already exists. Historically, I think in most organizations, if somebody wants some MI, their instinct is the people in their team will go and build it. They don't know what's out there. But the move into Power BI and the ability to publish information, access to it is constrained and controlled by user access controls. But knowing it exists in a catalogue, and therefore go and have the right conversation about, could that give me what I need? How could I get to it? What have I got permission to do? All of that is now live and active within the organisation. So huge benefit at that kind of exploitation side, which was all part of our strategy.
Yeah, we spoke in our initial call about the perception of building societies, I guess, being quite old school um, compared to some of these digital banks. How did you find the buy-in then from existing team members moving away from legacy kind of old school mainframe into this modern architecture, self-serve? How did you find that?
Yeah, so we didn't have mainframe here at Leeds. That was in my previous role, but we definitely got
Oh, sorry.
legacy tooling. No, we've definitely got legacy tooling. Um, I think one of the things that's always interesting when you do a modernisation journey is you sell a vision and everybody's up for it. Of course, we all want a single version of truth. Of course, we all want great tools.
Mm.
But when you then go and say to a team, this is how we need to change you, it's that, oh, we didn't think you'd change what we do. We thought what we do was great. It's everyone else we thought would kind of change. And culturally is certainly a huge piece. If you haven't got the buy-in, you're not going to get anywhere. And the hearts and minds is probably as much a part of my job as putting the tooling and capability in place. And I think that's from two perspectives, one from a top down, and then the other one, as you quite rightly say, is the teams themselves. From a top down approach, I remember not long after I joined the organisation, our chief executive asked me in a room with our executive team, what do you think is the single biggest risk? And my answer was not having the buy-in of the people in this room. Without that advocacy, without everyone agreeing, because data is so broad and so federated, you can't go and do it in a silo. Everybody needs to buy in to what we're trying to achieve and why. And I've been really fortunate to have an executive team from the get-go who have understood why we needed to change, what was that compelling case for change, and have given me the empowerment and the autonomy and the trust to go and get on with it and keep coming back and telling them where we're getting to. The nature of a cloud transformation, I think one of the benefits compared to perhaps historic, more big bang events, is you get to prove value incrementally. So you don't disappear into a black hole for 3 years and come and go, ta-da, look what I did. And along that journey, everyone's got bored and gone off to other priorities. Things like Power BI, we turned on within 2 months. We were building some value within 4 months. The fact we can deliver the value incrementally has kept people interested and engaged along the journey till you pivot to a point where it's the business articulating the value instead of the data team articulating the value. And that's been really important to have the advocacy and get that through the work we've done. I think from a colleague perspective, you're right. There are people who have used the same tools for a long time, who know it inside out. And what we've made sure that we do is take them on the journey, I think, is one of the key things. It's looking at future capability. It's giving them tools to get their hands on, to play with. We're again still very much on that journey. We've extended the team over that time. We've had to build a bigger team. So that has enabled us to bring new skills in. And then they've worked with some of the existing incumbents. But I would say by and large, we've seen a lot of enthusiasm, excitement about building for the future and some of the opportunities that it can bring to colleagues. So that side of things has been something that I think has been relatively successful in line with the top-down buy-in.
Yeah, nice. Okay, great. Well, we've definitely painted a good picture of kind of how we've got to where we are today. Moving into, AI and AI readiness as the topic and the theme of the podcast is, I guess the first question would be, at what point in this journey do you start thinking of, AI and Gen AI, agentic AI? When do these conversations start happening on a transformation like this?
Yeah, it's a really good question. And I would say we're at that point now. We are, in terms of where we currently are with AI, we are in use case exploration. So we've got some active use cases. We've got a backlog of other use cases we want to go and explore. We're having some very active, certainly senior management conversations about appetite, level of investment, where we want to go here, and how we use AI responsibly and to drive the right value. And I think it's fair to say that the continual conversation is a trade-off between probably three factors. Number one, is the value that something could bring. And that maybe is about exploration and then failing fast, but actually is there really value here? Is it something that's actually going to drive some value? And one of the reasons that conversation is equally interesting is you can't always quantify the value of AI in a traditional business case way. So, for example, if you roll out Copilot, people say, I'm working better, I'm more effective, I've got meeting transcription happening, I've got minutes being automatically generated. What you can't easily do is convert that into a number. You can't go back and say the quantification of the value is X. It's a leap of faith that this is going to make us work better, smarter, more productive. And so you've got to reframe even how you articulate value and how you think about the quantification. And part of that value is colleagues feeling empowered, they've been given the right tools and they're working in a modern way. That in itself, the cultural benefits need to come into fore. The second trade-off against the value then is, is AI even the answer? We're all aware of the AI washing that goes on. I get phone calls every day from people telling me about their fantastic new AI capability. And I look at it and think, that's just analytics. We were doing that 20 years ago. That's not really AI. But everybody calls everything AI now, right? Everything is AI. And companies who've worked in other organizations forever have just abandoned it and gone into AI. But actually, when you look under the bonnet, it's a lot of the same. So AI isn't the answer to every question, and definitely the stance can't be AI is the answer. What was the question? And so some of this is about saying, is AI really the right tool to throw at this, or is there another way we could solve that underlying business problem? And obviously, agentic AI evolves us into another dimension there in terms of some of the power. And then thirdly is obviously the risk, the ethics, the bias, the responsibility. As a member-owned business in particular, in a regulated environment, we have an absolute responsibility to our colleagues, to our members, to our stakeholders, to ensure that we are appropriate, proportionate and responsible in our use of AI. And that comes down to whether it's ethics and bias in modelling and how we ensure it's fit for purpose. There's a human ethics side. Building societies are generally very human places. We're all heavily committed, we certainly are, to branches. We have some people who will go into a branch and maybe it's their only human interaction they have in a week. What they don't want to do is to be forced into an AI heavy digitized journey. That won't work for them and it's inappropriate for us as an organization. So how AI fits in with what our members want, and we make sure we're using AI in a responsible way as opposed to just AI washing everything we do because that gives us better cost or whatever that could look like, isn't the answer. So there's lots of considerations from a data privacy, from a data protection, and whether that's colleague data, whether it's member data, the responsible AI and how we make sure we're working within an appetite. Every use case we look at for us is a trade-off between those three things. Is the risk and the value trade-off worth it? And is AI the answer? And that's very much where we are at the moment, is what's our top-down appetite for those things? How do we invest in them? But how do we recognize you don't do or not do AI? You do or not do individual use cases to understand the trade-off between those three things, if that makes sense.
Yeah. Okay. And what kind of use cases are you, I guess, sort of piloting at the moment?
So there's a combination of things. So I mentioned Copilot. Copilot was a very quick enablement for us because of the investment we've already made in Microsoft. And again, even if you take the data journey and digital journey out, like most organizations, we're in Microsoft M365 from a OneDrive and obviously Microsoft Outlook and all that tooling, SharePoint. So turning on Copilot and starting to use that, we've currently got it turned on for about 150 people in the organization. And we're constantly assessing the value that's driving to us and how we're getting some benefit of that tooling and sharing some lessons learned and things. So Copilot is a very active use case. One of the other areas we're looking at is how we can enable native AI functionality in some of the third-party systems we use. So whether that's a HR system, whether it's some of the knowledge bases we use hosted by third parties, whether it's the company who hosts our intranet site, a lot of the third parties we already have as part of our overall tech stack, they're obviously on their own AI journey. And so which of that functionality do we want them to opt into or out of? So again, we're assessing the risk and the value, but a lot of that native functionality is very quick for us to be able to turn on and get colleagues working in a different way. And some of those things are either an assessment or have started to be rolled out now. Alongside that, there's obviously much bigger ticket items, which are more about developing our own large language models, developing our own pipeline of AI cases. We've got some use cases happening there around semi-structured data. So where we've got big verbatim data from members, that could be, for example, they've written in with feedback or even a complaint, or where we've captured big notes. Colleagues, how do we get insight out of those? Well, actually, that comes all the way back to things like transcription of communication with members, how we then turn that into structured data, and how we can then use AI to categorize, drive insights, etc. So lots of that kind of activities in exploration, making sure that it's giving us the insight we need. We're not currently in a position where we're fast tracking things like let's get a chatbot and a virtual assistant, because that's not where we are in our journey. But will we get there? You know, that is still to unfold. But at the moment, it's very much about equipping colleagues, turning on third-party functionality, and then from a build perspective, we're also ensuring we're thinking about AI in our big transformation program. So we are so invested in the transformation program we're on. What we can't do is detract from that by putting a load of people into an AI journey. But what we can do is think about how AI can get us there quicker. So one of the tools in that particular program, for example, is a change delivery capability that uses a knowledge base, it uses a large language model to give you a first draft of a set of requirements. It gives you first draft of architectural documents. It creates test scripts, and it speeds up the transformation lifecycle journey from our agile delivery framework. And it leans into other projects that have done a similar thing. This is the kind of requirements they wrote. This is the testing they did. Us as humans can go in and add to that. We can amend it. We can delete things, but it's a fast track. So if it gets us 75% of the way there versus somebody having to very laboriously go catch every requirement, those are some of the things we're doing within that program, as well as active live use cases.
Interesting. And you mentioned about failing fast. So how do you, like, what point do you kind of, I'm trying to think what my question is. That at what point do you kind of go, okay, that isn't working? And how do you know? You know, how long do you give something? How do you know it isn't working? How do you know you've not, left too soon? If that makes sense.
Yeah, and I think we're probably a little bit early in our journey to kind of go, here's 10 examples where that's happened. But I think from a framework perspective, we've built a multi-step journey for AI. So it starts with an idea that gets triaged. That triage says, if we've got the tools, how quick to market, if something's going to take a year to do, but actually the payback is going to be minimal, then there's a stand it down fast, de-scope it, because that's not going to get us the value we need. And the slight challenge here is everybody loves playing with AI tools. So, you've got to kind of differentiate, is there really value, or just supposed to be something really fun to do? Because sometimes things are just really fun to go and explore. Once we pass through that framework and go, actually, there is some substance here, we're confident that there's a feasibility, there's a plausibility, there's a value base, it's within risk appetite, AI is the answer. We then go into a pilot and development cycle. And within that pilot, we've set some very specific, here's how we will assess the success. That pilot phase then says, is this a goer or not? And if at the end of that, we can see either, for example, it's a way bigger job than we expected. We thought this was going to take 6 weeks and we'd have done everything we need. Actually, we need all this enabling capability, or the data isn't AI ready, or whatever the answer is. We have to go and reassess and say, well, if we'd known that up front, if we'd known it was going to be a year's work, would it still have passed that triage process? If not, we need to stand it down. So that pilot is almost a discovery phase. It ratifies what we'd assumed in our feasibility, and then we move into kind of full-on development. And then part of that is the build at scale. At any stage in that journey, we absolutely are intending to pause and say, is this still the right answer? Is it still the right thing to do? And even once AI cases are in use and live, we're going to keep coming back and saying, should we now turn this off? Have we got all the value we're going to get out of it? But I think that's probably fairly standard with most things organizations do. You develop something, you put it in, you have to have this continual monitoring to say, is this still giving us a value, or could we evolve it? And I certainly think in the AI space, we may get to a point where the value starts to diminish, but a small additional functional build brings the value back up. And so incremental build out of AI capability, I think, will be the journey too. But for us, it's that life cycle: triage, pilot, assess, build, assess, launch, assess. And that continual cycle is where we will look to decommission and take things out if they're not driving value.
Yeah. Yeah, very good. When you start this journey, do you have like an end goal in mind, and then you start working on smaller projects to kind of give you those stepping stones to get to utopia, or do you just start with something and kind of see where it goes?
I think it's a combination of the two. AI is still such an emerging picture. I think personally, it's absolutely impossible to sit here and say this is where we want to be in 3 years' time. Because 3 years ago, no one could have guessed where we could have been today. And it is just moving so fast. So I think to that degree, it's a little bit less tangible than maybe other traditional strategies. So for example, if you are in a finance function, whilst there's a lot of emerging regulation, there are some elements of finance that will always persist year on year, and a strategy can be created that's probably can have some confidence in. I think with AI, that's very, very difficult. A lot of the AI, look what you could have, is still so assumed or imagined as opposed to real and embedded. We're also in a position where the regulators are still moving the boundaries a little bit around what we can do. And everyone's kind of waiting for that a little bit. So for us, I'd say we're doing it from both ends. We are in the midst of authoring an AI strategy, which will give us our overall blueprint, framework, appetite, how much we want to do, where we want to drive it forward, and that will create our guardrails and our framework. And then in parallel, we're doing this series of pilots, use cases to incrementally start to build out a capability with a view that the two of those together will give us our progress over the next kind of period. But that AI strategy, probably more than most strategies, is going to need to be continually refined and revisited as both the technology emerges, capability and competency, but also the regulatory environment we operate in continues to evolve.
Yeah. What kind of things would you have in that strategy? What would what are the kind of more important things that you would need to look at?
So some of the big things are some of the things I've talked about. So, what is our value assessment framework? How do we make sure we don't just default to using AI because it's fun? How do we make sure there's value here? It's a terrible phrase, but one often used. We don't want to be busy fools.
Yeah.
We don't want to spend a load of time doing some really exciting stuff, but when you look back in a year's time, you go back, has it actually changed anything? So part of that strategy is all about how we interchange those three pillars. The strategy is also about where our risk appetite is in terms of our ethics, our bias, our information security, etc., and where we want to set those guardrails, and that's definitely part of the strategic approach. There's an investment strategy. How much do we want to invest in AI? And at what point do we want it to become self-funding? So AI drives a value, and that value can be reinvested in the next AI, et cetera, et cetera. So in there, you've got your investment strategy, you've got your tooling strategy, you've got your competency and colleague skills. How do we equip colleagues with the skills of the future? How broad is that? Do we want AI champions federated across the organisation? Do you want everybody to be AI competent? Do you want it to be a single centre? So there's an operating model, skills, competency. There's an investment strategy, there's a risk and ethics. All of those pillars together make up the overall picture of where we want to go from an AI perspective. And as I say, part of that as well is the external factors influencing that in terms of the expectations of a workforce, the expectation of members, and the expectation of stakeholders like regulators or intermediaries in our instance.
Do you see that being the biggest challenge to executing on the strategy, or do you see other things being,
do I see
bigger challenges?
Sorry.
You're saying about the members, the regulation. To execute on the strategy, I guess. Okay, ask the question another way. What do you see as the biggest challenges to be able to execute on the, on the strategy?
I think it's a really interesting question, and I think my unfortunate answer is always going to be people, because I always think of the analogy that if 100 people got on a plane tomorrow and they were just about to taxi down the runway, and just before the doors shut, a voice came on and said, "Welcome to the first unmanned flight, transatlantic."
You just went, sorry, Carl, it went quiet then. You said 100 people on a plane just about to taxi off, and then I lost you.
Do you want me to answer again? Sorry.
Please.
Can you hear me now?
I can hear you.
I think people's. Okay, good. So for me, one of the examples I would give is if 100 people today got on a plane and they're just about to taxi down the runway, the door's still open, and a voice comes on and says, "Welcome to the first ever unmanned transatlantic flight. If you'd like to, you can still get off." Some people would be like, "This is amazing. Everything's autopilot anyway. It makes no difference." Some people wouldn't let the recording finish before they were off the plane. People's appetite is so different here, and their trust in automated decisioning, the confidence that there'll always be a human to fall back on. We all know in my transatlantic instance, most of it's automated anyway, but do we get comfort from a human being there just in case? Even though the reality is humans probably make many more errors and mistakes. And you only need to look at things like automated driving to see the example. Cars crash every day, but the first time a Tesla crashes catastrophically when it's in kind of self-drive mode, then actually that's front page news. But every other car crash isn't front page news. So human appetite is so varied. that whether you're setting a strategy at board level, whether you're talking to members, whether we're talking to brokers, whoever that is, colleagues, people have a very different appetite here. Some people see AI as, the future and the untapped opportunity of a generation, and we must go all in and do what we can. Other people see it as a flash in the pan. It's the next big thing. It's the new Bitcoin, the new blockchain. We've all been here. In actual fact, there's nothing to see. Let's keep doing what we're doing. And other people say we must avoid it because there's too much risk involved and we can't trust it. What's it doing? And that variation is one of the things that makes adoption very, very difficult, because there isn't one size fits all. And when we look across our stakeholders, that could be our internal colleagues, our decision makers, or all the way out to our members. The appetite for a 25 or 30-year-old looking for a digital savings product who would love something that gives them their best product available, somebody looking for a mortgage as a first-time buyer would love something that can guide them through the journey, and an agentic AI is perfect to be able to help people with some of those life moments. But maybe if you're somebody at the other end who is investing savings, who wants to go into branch with a passbook, your interest in AI is very different. So it's having that fit for purpose uses from an adoption perspective is definitely a challenge. If we worked in an organisation, for example, maybe like a Monzo, where you've probably got more of a single demographic in terms of digitally active, digitally interested, digitally educated, you want that kind of service. Adoption of AI probably looks and feels very, very different to an organisation with a much broader spectrum. So I think that's one of them. One of the other big challenges is which horse do you back? There is literally not a day goes by I don't get a phone call from another company telling me they're different. They've got something new and unique, or their tool does something nobody else's tool can do. You've got to be able to see the wood for the trees. You've got to not just have your head turned every 10 minutes by the latest thing, or you'll never make progress. So it's such an evolving picture that in itself definitely muddies the water in terms of which of those horses you back and how you put your investment in the right place.
Yeah. It's a great analogy as well. The aeroplane analogy resonates with me. I'm a terrible flyer as it is, so I think I'm off the plane.
We recently flew back from South Africa. We flew back from Cape Town to Johannesburg, and when we landed, after we landed, the pilot advised us that the landing had been done fully in autopilot, and it was part of a test they had to do twice a year. But they only told us after we'd landed.
After the fact, yeah. Yeah, it's an interesting one because I do drive a Tesla, to be fair. I mean, we don't get obviously fully self-driving over here, but I certainly use the adaptive cruise control, and I'm quite comfortable to do that. And I was over in San Francisco actually earlier in the year, and they've got these Waymos over there, which are fully, self driven vehicles, and I would get in one of those. I think it may be just more the fear of flying that would. No, I couldn't get. They're really difficult to get. I don't know if they're still on some sort of like membership scheme, because I think they were piloting it out, but I think you have to have some sort of special membership to it. So I haven't had the pleasure yet, but hopefully next year when I get out there, they're making them a little bit more available. And but what we did do, we had a day off actually. I went to the Databricks Summit, and on one of the days that we had, we took a tour around San Francisco, and the driver drove head on towards a Waymo to kind of show, what it would do. And as he was driving towards it, the Waymo, pulled to the side, let us go through, and then, got back on its route. So it avoided the collision. He wasn't going at high speed, of course, but, he was just demonstrating that they, its capabilities. But last question then.
So if you take, sorry.
That's all right, go for it.
And so if you take your example, you're clearly very AI curious, AI literate, you're clearly into, modernization and how we exploit some of this value, but you've got your thresholds. I'll do it in a car, but I wouldn't do it on a plane. And that's kind of exactly the point, that everybody's got a personal appetite and a threshold.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Okay, great. So just in terms of, giving advice back into the community, what would you say to other data and sort of tech leaders that are, kind of setting out on their AI journey? What would be some of your key pieces of advice?
Didn't come through at all. It froze. Could you just repeat the question from the beginning? Sorry.
course. What advice would you give to other data leaders in the industry who are setting out on their AI journey?
Wow, really good question. One of the things I'm fortunate to do is be able to leverage some of those peer networks. So I sit on two external committees, one through UK Finance, one through the Building Society Association, and sharing kind of battle scars, appetite. I think that everyone's a tad nervous about being the single pioneer, but nobody wants to get left behind. So everyone's trying to move a little bit with the pack on this, I think. We also have an informal network. Several building societies come together, and I work with some of my peers at those organisations. They are invaluable. And I think for me, one of the biggest things I would say is to leverage those networks. There's a lot of myths out there about AI. It's really easy to sit there thinking, are we behind everybody else? Is everybody else gone hell for leather and we've got to catch up? Am I failing at something? Actually, leveraging those networks and doing some checking in and sense checking, to my experience, by and large, says we're all fairly aligned in terms of where we are. In financial services, there's no question some of that alignment is regulatory driven. But I would say using that kind of helps keep your sanity a little bit. I think the other thing is to recognise you can't just dive into AI. You've got to become AI ready. And that
Yeah.
AI ready is about having the platforms, the tooling, data is a critical part of AI readiness. If you try and put an AI capability on top of data you've made no attempt to invest in, put in the right tools, have the right definitions around, you are going to fail. And that's from multiple perspectives. Your AI development will take longer than it should and have lots of bump in the road, but also if you don't understand your data first, you are absolutely more at risk of seeing bias, discrimination being introduced in models, etc. So I think there's what does AI readiness look and feel like, as opposed to quick, let's go and plug this thing in and off we go. It'd be a bit like buying your Tesla when you've not taken any driving lessons yet. And then I think culturally there is definitely to keep your sanity as a data leader or as an AI leader. There's definitely something about leveraging that network and working as one and understanding what else is out there. And to my experience, we're all on the same journey. And whilst obviously people are commercially appropriate in the information they share, sense checking in and even saying, what are you doing with it? Where are you seeing the value? Can help with some of that wood for the trees piece. We've also certainly used other peers, and I've both used this in a kind of reciprocal way, to kind of say, well, we tried that and it really wasn't great because, and they say, well, we tried this and it was great. Oh, fantastic. And it helps us kind of not necessarily fail faster, but help seek where maybe some of that value is. So leveraging network, peer value, but also, as I say, you can't just wake up tomorrow morning and decide you're going to go on a huge AI program if you haven't got the fundamentals first around risk control, data readiness, tooling, and colleague appetite and curiosity. Those things together, I think, are absolutely critical for me.
Yeah, brilliant. It's a bit like a double-edged sword, isn't it? Because it's, you'll have the people who are like, come on, we need it now, and we don't want to miss out. And then people in your role, you have to go, well, hang on a minute, let's slow down. Like, if we invest now, we're not ready.
Exactly.
We're not going
And
to
I
succeed
think to
here.
that extent, and that this is part of the AI strategy in the conversations. Again, we're really fortunate to have both a board and an executive team who are very bought into let's get the value, but let's get it in a responsible way, and very, very pragmatic about what that looks like. But I think the slight challenge with AI is it would be like letting kittens out of a bag. If you don't get the controls right from the beginning, it's going to be almost impossible to ever get them back in. And so this is the time to make sure we're doing it in a responsible, controlled, safe way, or it will just be so difficult to ever backtrack from.
Brilliant. Carole, thank you so much. We're nearly at an hour, to be fair. That went very, very quick. Always a sign of a good conversation. So thank you so much for your contributions. Really appreciate it. I hope you've enjoyed the show, and good luck. Good luck with the next phase of the journey.
Thanks, Dan. Thanks a lot.